You can tell a government is in chaos when every single budget idea gets leaked days and weeks before the budget actually happens. This is not a government in charge, it is a government in chaos. Before I get into the details of all that, welcome back to Andy Talks. I'm Andy, and I'm talking. Please do like and subscribe down below, and don't forget to leave your comments as we go through. Thanks very much for being here. Really do appreciate your company. Hope you get some value out of it, and I love hearing what you have to say in the comments below. Okay, so getting back to the budget fiasco. What a bloody mess, eh? What a bloody mess. I've never known anything like it in my 50 odd years on this planet. As I've never ever seen before a government run a budget on a committee, the committee of the entire country of the United Kingdom. But this isn't just your village hall committee or your parish council committee. It's not your Scrabble club committee or your chess club committee. This is the running of the country that you and I live in and you and I love. This affects your lives, our children's lives, our grandparents' lives, etc., etc. This is not how a country should be run. But let's just run over some of the ideas that have been discussed for the upcoming budget, which is still a week or so away yet, I believe. So, over the last week, there have been more budget ideas than I've had hot dinners, to be quite honest. And some of them have been quite laughable, some of them have been potentially sensible. But let's just run through a few of them. And bear in mind, the budget hasn't happened yet. There are no definitives. There are no things that are definitely on the table or definitely off the table. Well, maybe there are some things definitely off the table now. But to be honest, they shouldn't be at this point. Okay, so the number one and the biggest one that's come up recently is this potential rise to income tax of 1 pence, 2 pence, 5 pence, whatever it's going to be. There's going to be a rise of income tax, potentially to pay for an overhaul of the benefits and welfare system, or plug the infamous black hole that keeps being talked about and has been talked about for the last 18 months now, or to do something else with. But either way, they've talked about increasing income tax. The reasons have been changed endlessly. There's an immediate public backlash to it, quite understandably. They promised in their manifesto they wouldn't increase national insurance, income tax, or VAT, and here they are actively talking about it. So immediately, this was like, hey, fuck you, that you promised in your manifesto that you're not going to do this, and now you're doing it. And so the backlash was immediate. Now I think this was probably deliberate. This was probably thrown out there to get people panicking. Also, worst case scenario can happen. How bad can it be? And anything they do subsequently, it'll be less bad than that, so you feel better and relieved for them doing the less bad thing, which you would have felt outraged about if they hadn't mentioned the even worse thing that they were going to do before they did the bad thing that they are going to do. If all that makes sense, well done. Okay. So I think that the income tax thing, they set themselves up a trap with that in their manifesto. They didn't need to say they definitely wouldn't do it. Yes, it was an election-winning thing. Was it sensible? Probably not. And now I said right before the election, you cannot trust Keir Starmer. You cannot trust this government. That no one knows what he really stands for. Even right up to the day of election, I did not know what Keir Starmer stood for. Not really. That I didn't believe, I didn't trust him. And I said that to everybody I met. Said I can't trust him. I don't know what he stands for. I do my research. I do look at the policies. I do look at what they're doing. But there was nothing. Keir Starmer was the trite little businessman, sort of robotically parroting out this, that, and the other in a very controlled narrative. But I had no feeling from him. I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel inspired. I didn't feel antagonised. I didn't feel anything. And to be honest, I want to feel. And if I'm going to go out there, and I haven't voted for a very long time, because of this reason, but I am probably going to vote at the next election, whenever that is. And because I feel something, I feel there's something wrong with this country. But no, Keir Starmer I had no feeling for. And so I didn't vote, and I couldn't vote for him. So yeah, they've done a complete U-turn on income tax already. And then they've talked about a middle-class tax on professionals, potentially, whatever that means. taxing somewhere, someone in the middle, someone that's slightly better off, maybe for some people earning over 100,000 or maybe over 80,000 or whatever it is. But again, these aren't really huge earners in this day and age. These aren't massive earners. They are already paying a substantial part of the tax budget, and they're also having some struggles, in the same way that we are, that have less income than that. But again, that was seen as unfair. That's already been scrapped. No, as we already know, we had all this outrage earlier in the year about cuts to disability benefits, overhauling PIP, etc. And there were some grossly unfair things in there. I think that some of that was, should be tackled, should be left. There are genuine disabled people that do need support, and we mustn't forget that within this whole equation, that there are people who genuinely need support and help, and we should be there helping and supporting those people that do really need it. On the same token, we do need to tackle this huge spike we've had since 2020, particularly in the realms of mental health and in the realms of anxiety disorders that stop people from working and lead them to a lifelong claiming benefits. And this is particularly problematic for the younger generation. This is a result of the COVID effect, of the lockdown effect, and being scared to exist, I guess, and missing out on education, whatever else was involved there. But either way, we do have to tackle this problem. We cannot have a generation of worklessness, and anxiety, and even some forms of autism and some forms of other of those illnesses, those diagnoses, do not need to mean that people cannot work, and I think we have to find ways of getting people back into the workforce, rather than just accepting a lifelong a life on benefits for people in their teens and 20s. Now, that is just not a sustainable model for the country going forward. And it's not good for the person's well-being, for their lifespan, for their outlook, for their opportunities, or for the country as a whole. And so we do need to look at ways of how we can reduce the amount of people claiming the benefits there. But what they did was use a sledgehammer to try and crack that particular nut with. Last time I tried this, I went onto it very cack-handedly. This was right after they cut the winter fuel allowance as well. And so they immediately alienated huge groups of people, created a massive public backlash at the same time as the family farm tax, and this was last year now. But anyway, getting back to the current budget, they're still looking at ways of tweaking the disability and PIPs, etc. And I suspect that what they will do in regards to benefits is, rather than cutting benefits, they will cut the threshold at which people can earn money. So if you're on benefits, when you start earning money, when you go back into work, they'll reduce the amount of money you get from Universal Credit to support you when you go back to work. Now, I think that is a bad idea, because actually what that does is it says to people on benefit, it's not worth my bother working if I go to work and I only get £10 a week more than I got before. And we do need to support people in this transition between not having a job and having a job, and not having income and having an income. And the reality is that if you're renting a house or you have a mortgage and it is not enough to live on. The amount of money you get on a benefit, or the amount of money you get on a minimum wage job, even on its own, a minimum wage job is not enough to support the average person with the average rent and the average bills in this day and age, living in a house on their own. So we do need to look at that. We do need to address those things. But we need to take a practical and pragmatic look at this system and say, okay, look, these people, we probably can cut out the system. We don't need to be supporting them. We definitely don't need to be giving money to immigrants or to people that are European citizens, EU citizens. We should not be. We don't get benefits when we go to France or Germany and move there. So that's only fair the other way around. We wouldn't expect to go to another country and live off their benefit system. And so people from other countries shouldn't expect to come here and do the same thing. So I'm sure there's billions we can save there. There's billions we can save from the closure of immigration hotels and mass deportations. But again, I'm digressing. So one of the other things being talked about a lot over the last a month or so, is the cutting the two-child benefit cap. Now, for those of you who don't know what this is, if for people with more than two children that were born after 2017, I think the cut-off date was. If you had more than two children born after that date, you would only get universal credit for the oldest two of those children, and not for the third, fourth, fifth, or subsequent children. Which seemed to make sense at the time. You still get the child benefit for them. The child benefit is an access pot of money that means everyone gets into the system, and people can get them until they're earning sort of £45,000 a year. But they stopped paying benefits. If you had more than two children, so you wouldn't get any housing benefit support. You wouldn't get universal credit support. For those children unless they were on disability benefits. Which in its own right, I think is probably partly explains why there's been a big increase in childhood disability benefit claims. And similarly, that if you were in a family where you have more than two children, my daughter was an example of this. My daughter and her partner, they had three children together. They were both working at a time. They unfortunately broke up. She ended up a single mum with a newborn baby, couldn't work, couldn't afford the childcare to put the youngest into childcare, and then couldn't go to work through not having a car and be able to get to work in the first place. And so she was trapped in this, not being able to work because the childcare was too expensive or too inaccessible, and there were no jobs available. So she needed the extra support from universal credit to pay for her bills, her children, the extra things that they need, and was unable to do so. And ended up in abject poverty as a result of it for the longest time. Ended up with massive debts. But this is not the children's fault. The children don't deserve to live like that. The children deserve to have food on their plates and meals on their table, rather than clothes on their back. It's not their fault. It only punishes the children. And it shouldn't be punishing anybody. We do need to be encouraging the birth rate in England. We do need to do that. And we have to do that financially as much as anything else. This needs a whole society change, to get our birth rate from where it is now at 1.3, 1.4. It's not sustainable where it is now. Our population will collapse unless we get the birth rate back up to 2.1, 2.2 level. So we do need to incentivise people to have children. And their benefit system can be used appropriately for part of that. Particularly through child benefits, and supporting childcare, but we do need to restrict that to British citizens and not foreigners, and we do need to look at how we support parents working, and we need to look at also at why now in 2025 it takes two people working full time to successfully run a household. When back in the 80s and 90s it could be managed successfully with one person. That suggests that the value of one person's wage has drastically diminished in comparison to the outgoings. And we need to look at that. We need to really think about that. But this grossly unfair two-child benefit cap, which really penalised children and has driven hundreds of thousands of children into poverty, does need to be scrapped. Now, whether it will be or not is another matter. And obviously, by its very nature, it only affects the poorest children, i.e. those with parents that are on universal credit. So by its very nature, stopping that affects the people on the lowest incomes more. It drives children into poverty, it reduces their opportunities, reduces their lifespan, reduces their chances of improving themselves in their life. And ultimately, we know through childhood poverty, it leads to more chances of being in the justice system or being in the prison system, and causing crimes, which then has a separate cost. It has the poorer health outcomes because we can't afford decent food and decent vitamins to support the food, and so the justice system and health costs get more and more and more. And the contribution to society gets less because those people, if they end up in the criminal justice system or they end up sick, can't work, they can't contribute. And so this is putting massive problems into the future, massive problems. And so this has been talked about endlessly. And I personally very strongly believe that we do need to chop out this and it needs to stop. as soon as possible, and we need to level the playing field again to allow all children and the lowest income families to be supported where they need to be. But the government's flip-flop back and forward on it. It's going to cost a few billion quid, probably £6 or £7 billion, in fact, to implement this. What I think they will probably do is say that they're going to do this in 2027 or something like that. They're going to kick it down into long grass. It's not going to be next year, and not going to be, maybe even the year after. I don't know. They might push it to when they think there might be a general election. And let's face it, Keir Starmer's days do seem to be numbered. This whole chaos of this budget, shows what a weak and fractured government he has. The fact that they can't contain the narrative within their own party. They can't have a consistent viewpoint. The Chancellor doesn't seem to know what the bloody hell she's doing. She doesn't know how to run a child's piggy bank, let alone the finances of a nation. And Keir Starmer, it seems like a terrible parent to Rachel Reeves. He isn't guiding her, he isn't supporting her. That they're both floundering in the dark together. That does not inspire confidence. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so one of the other things being talked about is the universal credit work requirements. Again, this has been floated, and we don't know what's going to happen there. They're talking about stricter sanctions and tougher fitness for work tests, etc., etc. There is possibility, to tinker with that somewhat, but as it's filling around the edges, it's not going to make any substantial difference at any point soon. And again, this has been leaked in the press, and has got massive pushback from disability groups, understandably, because it tends to be disabled people that are most disproportionately affected by these things. But we do, again, like I said earlier, we do need to look at universal credit, but the Treasury is split on this. There's no unity in the government on any single part of this policy budget. The Labour MPs themselves sometimes are their own worst enemies. They will not allow the change that needs to happen to balance the books. And it seems impossible to square the conscience of having a supporting welfare system that helps the people most in need. At the same time as taking away from the people that don't need it, like the immigrants and like those people on the edges of it that are claiming for a bit of anxiety here and there. So another thing that's being talked about, again, is a council tax overhauling. Council tax banding has been talked about quite a lot. There's been speculation they could revalue all the houses in the country, and that could put council tax bills up massively for just about everybody. They're already pretty huge and already pretty unaffordable for a lot of people. So that in itself creates its own problems, and probably is very unpopular. So then they decided that they'll push that up to just the richest people with the mansion tax, inverted commas, i.e. people's houses worth over £500,000 or worth over £1 million. Now, as it turns out, that also disproportionately affects people with flats in London that are worth a lot of money because they're in London, but they don't have a huge income to support that necessarily. But again, there's no agreement in the government about what to do with council tax banding. Now, personally, I think council tax is a very unfair system, and I think it should be probably a local income tax system will be far more effective than council tax is. And the valuations are based on 1992 or 93 values, I think it is. But council taxes have gone up and up and up and up, and the services that we're getting have gone down and down and down and down. We've seen our libraries closed, we've seen the swimming pools closed, we've seen the things that used to be offered by local authorities, even the shore start centres, taken away. And we're left with a very hollowed out thing where all the money is going to social care and childcare and special needs care, and there's nothing left for anything else. So we seem to be paying more money and getting less back. Which seems very unfair, and it is unfair. That people are seeing it. People are saying, "Hey, I'm paying several £100s more than I was paying a few years ago, but I'm getting far less for my money." And so council tax appears to be very unfair. That they're not going to get what they want, I don't think, with this council tax banding. But again, there's no agreement. And I think with all the infighting and the talk of leadership within the leadership challenges within the Labour Party itself. We've got Andy Burnham and we've got Wes Streeting being talked about. Now, I personally think Shabana Mahmood is actually, positioning herself quite nicely for a leadership role there as well. But the point is, when the leader is so ineffective, when that person can't control their own ship, and every policy that comes out is incoherent and badly managed, then the talk turns to change of leaderships because people are worried about the May elections, and all the indications are Labour will get annihilated in the May elections, and yet we've got to get there. That Labour MPs are very jittery about it. They're very jittery about Keir Starmer. There's lots of talk of leadership challenges, and what happens then is that all the policies get put on hold. No real government business really happens. You start positioning yourself at who am I going to support, who am I going to back, who am I not going to back. You get all the behind the scenes infighting. We saw it with Boris Johnson. Here's a classic example of what Tory party do to each other. And the Tory party is very famous for it, done it since Margaret Thatcher's days, possibly before, but I don't remember that. But we're not seeing it so much in the Labour Party, not within a sitting government, apart from maybe with Brown and Blair towards the end of the Blair administration. But that was more a pre-agreed pact they had some time ago. And then Brown lost anyway when it came to the election. So here we have a government in disarray, a government in chaos, a budget that's a complete and utter shambles. You just don't do this. You don't drip feed bits of a budget to see what the public reaction might be, and then say yes or no to it depending on the public reaction. If you're a government and you've got a massive majority like they have, you can just put your foot down and say this is what we are going to do, and force it through Parliament regardless whether people like it or not. And governments have done this many times. But the Labour government just don't seem to be strong enough, and their own party seems to be too fragmented, and too incapable of coherently pushing an agenda forward. And then the other thing we've seen just before we finish this video, and a couple of other bits, that local councils, as we've been reading about it earlier on, have been quietly cutting council tax support again for the most vulnerable people. So where people were getting 100% support with their council taxes, which are up to £200 a month or more in some places, and they're getting council tax support, what used to be called council tax benefit in the old days, and now isn't anymore. The councils have been quietly reducing that and sometimes cutting it out altogether. And I had some reports, somewhere down in Somerset, I think, where they slashed their support down to 10% from 100%. And then so people are then finding themselves with huge bills to pay they didn't have to pay before. And again, these are the poorest people with the least ability to afford it. So the councils are quietly doing that, which is again putting up taxes on the quiet, and people aren't seeing that. You're not really hearing about it in the news. I think we probably will see more of that in the next couple of days, because that is just an emerging story that's coming up. And then probably the biggest thing, and I think at the moment they've agreed to increase it by inflation next year. But if you remember, under austerity, the George Osborne government, the government froze the rates of numerous things, including benefits, including the taper allowance for when you start earning money, including various other things that saved the government money and gave less money to the people. So it made the people poorer. So because obviously the prices still go up. So I think we're likely to see some tinkering with some of these things where thresholds, for example, maybe with income tax, where the threshold I think is £12,500 at the moment, and that would normally rise by the rate of inflation or thereabouts. They might freeze that for the next 5 years, and say okay, that's going to stay at £12,500 for 5 years, which obviously in real terms means it's worth far less money. So it's not increasing by the rate of inflation. So those are things that governments normally do where they don't directly raise a tax, but by freezing something, it does raise a tax, and then it makes it so you're poorer. So all in all, there's nothing that I've heard leaked, I've seen, I've had any reports of, apart from possibly the two-child benefit cap being abolished. I can't see anything that offers any inspiration to anybody. You know, if you're a multi-millionaire business owner, there's no reason to keep your company in this country. You're going to go abroad. For those of us that are stuck here and we can't afford to go abroad, or we've got commitments here, you know, we have to lump it and deal with it somehow. You know, but there's nothing inspiring. There's nothing uplifting. There's nothing talking about really supporting people within this. Everything is about what they're going to cut, how much they're going to cut, and where they're going to cut it from. And so I think it's going to be a very, very difficult budget. That it's going to be difficult for the government, I think, even to pass it when they get it into the after budget day itself. And it's going to be difficult for the public to swallow it. So it remains to be seen. All I can say is that everything is up in the air at the moment. You know, they're throwing all the spaghetti at the wall. They're looking to see what sticks. Nothing seems to be sticking. Your guess is as good as mine. But if you've got any thoughts about what you think is going to appear in this budget, please do write it in the comments below. Please let me know what you think of how the government's handled this budget so far. You've heard what I think on it, but I'd love to know what you think on it as well. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks very much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Bye bye.